The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Thank you, Tally Olson. I am back. You are comfortably zoned with me, the Zigzag Man, Ralph Tyko, kind of the token Jew in Alameda. And I mean token with an I. And I speak to the most interesting people on the planet on this podcast. And today is no exception. He's a New Yorker from Brooklyn, went to Stuyvesant High School, a high school where you have to take a test to get in, as opposed to not taking a test to get out in Newtown High School. Joseph Dorinson, welcome to the airwaves.
I am delighted to join you. I also want to point out that I taught at Stuyvesant almost 10 years after I graduated, and I had the distinction of being fired by the principal, commonly known as the flea, in disrespect.
Okay. What brought on, first of all, teaching at the school you went to, and Stuyvesant is one of the three schools in New York, Brooklyn Tech, Stuyvesant, and I can't remember the third one. Very
Bronx High School of Science.
Bronx High School of Science, indeed. And you taught at the school you went to. How did that come about?
I was looking for work. I was teaching as a substitute at Harlem, and if you can make it there, you can make it anywhere as a teacher. And I was invited to take over for a teacher who was, I think, unable to continue. So I ran down literally to the Lower East Side of Manhattan, where it was situated, and I became an immediate teacher. And I put on the board the first day, Joe Dorinson, class of 54, now teacher 63. And I got a hurrah. Anyway, I had a famous basketball player in my class who was responsible for my ouster in a way. His name was Charlie Scott, who later became an All-American at the University of North Carolina, the first black to receive an athletic scholarship there. And he paved the way for future greats, Michael Jordan among them. And he was doing poorly in my class. And then I spoke to him, gave him a pat on the shoulder. I didn't realize he was having family problems, which was later revealed. And then he got an 85. And the principal called me down and said, I want you to fail him. I said, why? He replied that Scott was doing poorly. I want to get rid of him. I said, well, I refuse to fail him on the grounds that you want to get rid of him. And so he got rid of me and Scott at the end of the semester. I felt that to do so would be to give in to this arbitrary dictator. He was the most hated principal in Stuyvesant history. And at graduation, the whole student body booed him to his chagrin. So I was involved in union activity. I'm a union guy. And the fledgling UFT was getting steam. And I think he fired me for a number of reasons. But I feel I associate being fired by the flea as a badge of honor.
Okay, was it contested on your part?
Well, I didn't have grounds to stand on because I was a temporary sub. I didn't have a regular license, and I did not have tenure. And, of course, tenure is under attack throughout the country as the right-wing elements are trying to destroy academic freedom. It started in Florida recently, and it's spread.
Okay, you went from there to LIU.
Yeah, I taught at Lehman College in the Bronx, formerly Hunter, as an adjunct. I then got a full-time job at what is now called Kane College, and I was fired there too for one leading the advocacy to the end of the Vietnam War, and despite my popularity with students, the president, Eugene Wilkins, ousted me after 2 years. So all dressed up with no place to go, I was going to go back to high school, Seward Park, on the Lower East Side, when I got a call that LIU needs a professor to take over for a recently departed professor/dean. And I went to this interview with a black eye sustained in a basketball game, and I wore sunglasses to hide the black eye. And a guy, my boss, my future boss, interviewed me, and he too was wearing sunglasses. So we got along famously. He asked me, "Joe, do you drink?" And I thought this was going to be the question that either gets me the job or loses me the job. And I said hesitatingly, "Yes, but in moderation." He said, "You're hired." And we had many a drinking party subsequently. And I was teaching at LIU for 53 years when I was urged to retire due to age and due to a lack of jobs for the junior faculty. So I retired reluctantly, but the deal I negotiated was not fulfilled. So here I am, a professor of 53 years, teaching 57 years in total, and unable to secure a professor emeritus status because there, too, I was considered a rebel, involved in 5 strikes, one of which I led. And so I am what you call a union man from the day I was born to the day I kick off.
Well, you have my lasting admiration. I can tell you stories. I can tell you stories about friends and relatives that were positively and negatively affected by the union situation in this country, and I appreciate your sacrifices. I want to say thank you for your service.
I omitted one anecdote. In 1979, I was assistant dean in the School of Business at LIU, and we had a strike. And technically, I didn't have to do anything. When the dean said, after I protested, he said, "I'm not going to cross a picket line," I told him. He said, "You don't have to." But I felt guilty that my colleagues or comrades, if you will, were on strike, and the strike lasted 5 weeks. And during that period, I not only did I go on the picket line, I became one of the executives. So I got fired from my administrative job, but thanks to union that makes us strong, I had tenure. And so I went back to the classroom as teacher, where I flourished for the next 40-plus years.
Let me ask you this.
Yes.
What was your most satisfying one-on-one teaching experience with a student?
I had many, and it's hard to pick out particularly one. But there was a high maintenance student who came, I think, he lived in Maspeth, and he went to a high school in Queens with a 65 average. And LIU was a second opportunity school before open enrollment took over in 1967 at the City University. And his name was Mitchell Elberg. Unfortunately, he passed away recently. And I took him under wing. Not only did I teach him, but I encouraged him. I even asked him to play basketball with us on the LIU Brooklyn Paramount floor. And not only were we good friends in the classroom, but we became friends for life. And I considered his success. He became a lawyer, a vice president of Metropolitan Life. Unfortunately, ill health forced him to an early retirement. But when I look at that particular experience, I feel that my life as a teacher was fulfilled. And after all, Henry Adams famously said that a teacher affects eternity. And he or she, in this enlightened age, never knows what outcome he or she will have on the future. And I feel a student like Mitchell, and there were others who I took under wing. I also, to go back to Charlie Scott, when I saw him later at the NBA store, I reminded him of this incident. And to see that he succeeded after he left Stuyvesant, he became valedictorian of his class in North Carolina in a private school, and became a fine scholar athlete at the University of North Carolina, later an outstanding ball player and a role model. And he's in my book, by the way, my recent book, The Black Athlete as Hero, published by McFarland in 2022, just a few months ago.
Oh, wow.
And I consider Charlie Scott another one of my triumphs because of what he accomplished after sustaining this indignity as I did of leaving Stuyvesant under duress. And I remind Stuyvesant bigwigs, including some executives, the mistake that Dr. Fleeta made in ousting us both.
Well,
redemption came belatedly.
The plea was well named.
Yeah.
How has Brooklyn and New York changed over the years? I'm a native New Yorker from Queens. I grew up in Queens. First the Bronx, then Manhattan, then Queens to grow up. And Queens is where I was almost drafted and had to leave New York because I enlisted in the Air Force to avoid going to Vietnam, pure and simple. I was stationed in California, spent my adult life out here, and still have a number of roots in New York. How has it, in your eyes, changed over the years?
Okay, wonderful question. Let me preface my response by saying I now live in Queens, or on the border, at North Shore Towers, forced to do so by my children and wife. I reluctantly moved in order to avoid climbing 3 stairs and 3 flights, and also fighting traffic in Brooklyn and other, you might say, inconveniences when you reach the age of 86, as I have recently. Wow. I love Brooklyn. I lived in Brooklyn for 76 of my 86 years on planet Earth. I grew up in the Williamsburg housing projects, a low-income development thanks to the largesse of the New Deal and our great president, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And we were poor, but we didn't realize we were poor. There was no television, so we couldn't see how the other half lived. And we loved the ambience, the culture, the candy store where we gravitated and we told jokes, sometimes at the expense of friends' family. And we grew up
Brooklyn Dodger baseball.
Yeah. I saw my first baseball game with my impoverished friends, thanks to a charitable organization that took us to Ebbets Field in the summer of 1945. It was a hot August day. We sat in the bleachers with the proletariat purposefully, and in the center field defense of the Dodgers, there was a Jewish player named Goody Rosen, who was kept in the minor leagues, I believe, due to, you might say, Gentile anti-Semitism, because he never hit below 300 in the minor leagues. But he was brought up during the war, and he was a star. So I felt enriched. I mean, there were other players that I remember on the field. Augie Galan, there was Eddie Stanky. So I really fell in love with baseball in Brooklyn. And when I later appeared on radio with Leonard Lopate, so this is not my first radio gig, I reminisced about the Brooklyn that I remember, the Brooklyn that welcomed Jackie Robinson with open arms, while other cities, including the alleged city of brotherly love, threw black cats on the field and targeted him with abuse and the always present N-word. So Brooklyn was a place where Jews and Italians and Irish and Norwegians and blacks could gather in a religious shrine, if you will. Ebbets Field had more prayer every ball game than you had in all the churches, synagogues, and mosques put together. And we loved the Dodgers.
Speaking of prayers, I'm reminded of Gil Hodges in the slump. And the churches prayed for him. He was incredible story, and I shared my memory last week with Irene Hodges, his daughter, on the show. And I asked her a question that I'm going to ask you. I won't tell you how she answered until you answer. But could the Jackie Robinson experience, the Branch Rickey experiment, or whatever you want to call it, been successful in any other city in the United States besides Brooklyn?
Absolutely not. And let me tell you something about the Hodges family. I lived a few blocks away from where they resided on Bedford Avenue. I know the church that they attended and the school that was named Gil Hodges in his honor, PS 193. I was on the school board when that honor was conferred on the Hodges family. And I want to tell you something that appears in my book on Jackie Robinson, written back in 1997 after the conference that I hosted or co-hosted with my colleague Dr. Warman, which attracted 500 people on a 3-day venture in Brooklyn. I was told that Joan Hodges used to meet with the Dodger wives, many of whom were from the South. And they resented and resisted the inclusion of Rachel Robinson, who was still alive at age 100, from attending their luncheons. And Joan Hodges said, "Girls, this is not the South. This is Brooklyn. Rachel joins us." And before you could say Jackie Robinson stole second base, third base, and home plate, Rachel Robinson attended those luncheons. So to answer your question with brevity, if not with wit, the answer is no. Brooklyn was the only place for the noble experiment to succeed.
Irene Hodges agrees with you 100%. And I will send her a link to this podcast once I get it up, and she'll be delighted.
Please add that in my various presentations at Cooperstown, I used to give lectures there that were later published at the symposium on baseball. I invariably promoted Gil Hodges for the Hall of Fame, and it was long overdue. And I have a quote from Leo Tolstoy that fits the Hodges experience. God sees the truth, but waits. And Hodges finally was enshrined in that Hall of Fame, that pantheon of American baseball greats.
And it happened before Joan Hodges passed away.
Yes.
And that was wonderful. And this is being said on my part, I was a New York Giant fan. And you mentioned your adjustment moving to Queens from Brooklyn. Had Walter O'Malley moved to Queens, the Dodgers would still be there. And that was a terrible blight on the city.
Yeah.
How did the Dodgers and Giants moving, in your mind, affect the way the city went? Did it go downhill for a long time after that move in '57?
Yes. As my late friend Marty Adler, who was president of the Dodger Alumni and Fan Club, said, it was a blow to the heart. It left a void in that heart, in that collective heart that has never been replaced. It was part of a decline that Brooklyn faced during white flight, the flight to the suburbs, thanks to Robert Moses, who's partially responsible for the Dodgers' flight, although my judgment, O'Malley deserves most of the blame. He was greedy, he was needy, and he succumbed to the temptation of Chavez Ravine and a great tax deal that the local legislature conferred on him. I went to Dodger Stadium in 1997 with my wife to get money to underwrite my Jackie Robinson conference. I met with the then public relations director, the great Tommy Hawkins, former Lakers star, and he told me, Joe, I can't give you money. I asked him why. He said, because you're a keynote speaker. Roger Kahn, who wrote that magnificent book that brought Jackie and Pee Wee and Gil and Carl Furillo and Clem Labine back into the national consciousness.
They were the boys of summer.
Yeah, summer, right. And he had come to California at the invitation of the O'Malley family, and he was interviewed by the Los Angeles Times, and very imprudently, he responded to a question, "What do you think of Peter O'Malley, the new owner?" He said his father, Walter, was a scoundrel, but Peter is too dumb to be a scoundrel. End of my appeal. So then,
that's what's
then
known as a backhanded compliment.
Yeah, Tom Hawkins went back into his office, brought out a poem which he wrote after the death of Jackie Robinson and his own mother, and it's called "Ode to Jackie." And he read it to my wife and myself, and as he read these eloquent, poignant words, we started to cry because it was so moving. I'm tearing up as I speak. And I said, "Can I have the poem?" He said, "Sure." "Can I read it at our conference?" "Sure." And I did. And after the conference was over and I put all the great presentations together for a book, I asked Tom Hawkins, "Can I print your poem?" And he said, "Sure." And I felt a debt of gratitude. And in publishing my latest book, I included that poem once again, and it really speaks to the glory that was Brooklyn and the grandeur that was Jackie Robinson at bat, on the base paths, in the field, and in the annals of history.
Absolutely. If you get a chance, you might look at Peter Golenbach's book, Bums, and he has an interview with Rachel Robinson that is so poignant that I get goosebumps when I think of what Jackie and Rachel, who went through it together, they were absolute partners in it, and what they went through, spring training, getting to spring training, the South, all of it, Philadelphia, St. Louis. It was, he was a hero. And I might tell you the story of what Martin Luther King said when he was called the grandfather of civil rights. He said that honor belongs to Jackie, because without Jackie, it would have come, but years later. And it still hasn't come per se. There are still inequalities that run rampant, but it's a start. It was a start in our lifetime, and it was one of the best things that happened to society since I was born in 1946. And I skip around in this. You mentioned Eddie Stanky, who you saw in your first year, 1945, with the Dodgers. Eddie Stanky was the 51 second baseman for my Giants. And I got to see him in 51 when I was 4.5 years old, and all the rest of them. I saw Willie, and I saw the Giants before Willie was called up and after, and I saw the refiguring of that team, and I want to thank my grandfather for putting the passion in my in my head in the early years. And my Aunt Sonny lived across the street from on Bedford, on what was it, Bedford Avenue. And in an apartment building right across, overlooking. And I still became a Giant fan because I was given the option. But in my dotage, my memories of the Dodgers are as strong as my memories of the Giants, Bobby Thompson notwithstanding.
Yeah, I agree. And I want to mention that Peter Golenbach's a very good friend of mine. In fact, I dedicated my last book to him. And what you quoted is right on. Peter Golenbach also has in that book a reference to Ed Charles, another one of my acquaintances who came to work. The glider. And he when he was actually, he saw Jackie twice, once on the east coast of Florida where he lived, and then he moved to the west coast. And when Jackie appeared, he encouraged Ed and his friends to continue. And when Jackie got on the train, Ed Charles, and I think it's in 42, the movie, a glamorized version of what happened, of course, and that Ed and his friends chased the train, and Ed put his ear to the tracks to hear the train reverberating, and it gave him a vision of the future and a sound of things to come. And he wrote a poem, also an ode to Jackie, which he delivered at a conference and elicited more tears. So I can't tell you how much I enjoy this exchange because I came from a broken family. My mother was a Dodger fan because she rooted for Jackie Robinson. My father was a Giant fan because he grew up after immigrating to the United States in Jersey City, which housed the Giants' principal farm team. And I was a Yankee fan because I idolized Joe DiMaggio. My name is Joe Dorinson. I played center field. I was known as Joe D in the neighborhood, but that's where the comparison ends. I couldn't hit like him or field like him, but I often played in awe of him. So, growing up in that time, I know you're 10 years younger than me. I wish I could go back in time and a time machine. But those days of glory when you had three teams in New York, and the only year that New York didn't appear in the World Series was 1948, when the Cleveland Indians faced off successfully against the Boston Braves. And Satchel Paige became the first black pitcher to appear in a World Series game. So,
that was
to answer your question,
next question. I'm sorry.
I just want to say, to answer your question in a roundabout way, when the Dodgers and Giants left, it's true that the Mets did offer some restitution and some substitution, but it was never the same after those 2 days.
And I was an original Met fan and got to see them in the Polo Grounds. It wasn't the same. Nothing can replace those three teams and the greatness year after year. We thought it was a birthright to have the World Series played in New York. And and even after they left in 1959, the Los Angeles Dodgers, if you'll excuse the expression, played in the World Series. So it continued. The legacy continued. I want to say one
Right.
thing about you talk about honoring black athletes. Walter O'Malley, who they used to joke, if you had to kill anybody, Hitler, Stalin, and Walter O'Malley, who would it be? 3 bullets, only 1 bullet, that kind of thing. Walter O'Malley did the only nice thing, the only that I have ever read about. In 1959, he honored Roy Campanella by giving him a day, and it was at the old Coliseum in Los Angeles. There's something like 90,000 people lit candles to Campy, and he donated the proceeds of that night to Roy Campanella. And so when I think of O'Malley, I always think of that as well.
Well, to set the record straight, O'Malley and Robinson didn't get along because of Robinson's devotion to Branch Rickey. And Branch Rickey, as we pointed out in my book on Jackie, Branch Rickey finessed $1 million out of O'Malley when he sold his rights. And it's a complicated story, but basically O'Malley in 1951 wanted Rickey out, and he offered him a paltry sum. Rickey then went to a friend who was involved in real estate, and I don't want to mention his name because it might create more injured feelings, but he got help from this source, and he went to O'Malley, and he got $1 million to get out of town. And from that point on, Rickey became a kind of absent father figure for Jackie, and Jackie could never really cotton to O'Malley. So when he was traded to the Giants, your team, and after he retired, just before he retired, he was traded to the Giants for, as Rachel put it, 30 shekels of silver, actually $25,000, and a mediocre pitcher named Dick Littlefield. And this was a real insult. Jackie retired as a Dodger, and he wrote a very, very, how should I say, polite letter to Horace Stoneham, thanking for his offer with a nice contract, but he was compelled to turn it down to pursue other interests. And Jackie became, in retirement, the first major black executive of a corporation, chock full of nuts.
Chock full of nuts, right.
And we used to refer to it in Brooklyn as the scrotum, something that, a sack of personal decorations. So anyway, for 7 years, he was vice president of this wonderful restaurant, which kept me fed through my college years. I used to go and chock full of nuts. For 50 cents, you could get a nutted cheese sandwich, a cup of coffee, and some kind of confection afterwards. Sometimes you get a bowl of soup with that. It was great. And I
remember the jingle, chock full of nuts, is the wonderful
Heavenly coffee.
Heavenly coffee, right?
That Rockefeller's money couldn't buy, and Rockefeller sued, and they had to change the lyric. But when Jackie opened up a second store on 116th Street and Broadway near my Columbia University campus, I met Jackie, and I said, Mr. Robinson, I always wanted your autograph. Please, please. He said, sure. so give me something to write on. And I fumbled into my book bag, and I brought out something, and he said, you don't want me to sign this. I gave him my checkbook. So he says, I can't do this. So I then found the New York Post, which was once a great newspaper, before Rupert murder. And he signed it on the sports page. I took it home. I was happy. And 2 days later, I said, Mom, where's the New York Post? And she said, Joseph, I threw it out in the incinerator. And that ended my love with my mother. At that point, I cut the umbilical cord, and she was no longer my favorite. How could you do that?
How could you do that? I could tell you stories. I could tell you stories about my mother and our baseball connection. Right. I went home to watch. I went home from school to watch the final inning of Don Lawson's no-hitter against the Dodgers, as a matter of fact. And I got to talking with my mother, and she said, you know, it's not the only story you're going to remember today. I was at Lou Gehrig's in 1939. She was a 19-year-old kid and went to the game that Lou Gehrig gave that wonderful speech. And years later, I became podcasting partners with George Case III.
Oh, yeah,
a wonderful guy. And his dad, I have wonderful stories about George Case. But George Case was lined up on that on the baseline that day, and my mother got to see George Case, and not knowing, of course. And years later, we went to Washington for a trip to see the new Washington Senators, and George Case was the third base coach at that time.
Wow.
So, my mother, who
was Ted Williams the manager then?
He was a coach for Uncle Mickey Vernon was the manager of that team, and George Case was a coach. I have so many podcasts, wonderful memories of the Case's family and his stories about growing up as a kid, whose dad played Major League Baseball. And I've made it a point in my podcasting career to interview as many children of former baseball players, Billy Bruton, Mickey Mantle's kid David, as well as Irene Hodges. They come to mind first. So it's a wonderful, if you're gonna have a craziness in life.
A lot of credit. That's a very ingenious way of creating a family culture of baseball, because there's something about baseball that remains deeply embedded in the American culture. It may not be as popular now as football with its violent, warlike character, or the balletic moves of a basketball player, but there's something timeless about baseball. The idea of playing on a green field, even if it's artificial grass, and circling the bases and coming home. This is all what we yearn for, family, home.
What George Carlin had a great
Yes.
a great bit comparing baseball to football, and he uses those exact words: coming home, I'm home. You know, the gentleness of it all.
And the building
Joseph,
of generational togetherness, a father and son, and now a father and daughter, because my granddaughters play baseball, soccer, touch football. It's a different era, but it still holds the mystique. It's back to the rural, slow pace of the pre-industrial society before the jangling discords of urban life robbed us of the serenity that we once had.
you're a very well-spoken guy, Joseph. Even if you don't play baseball like DiMaggio, you write like Hemingway. How about that?
You're kind. Ralph, you just sent me to seventh heaven with those compliments.
Well, they're well deserved.
I would tell you my Hemingway story. I met him in Pamplona in 1959, and it was one of the great moments of my life. And I thought he was going to punch me out. We were sitting getting drunk in preparation for running with the Bulls, and I saw him walking across the square, and I said, Papa, in my semi-stupor. And he came right at me, and he said, can I sit down? I said, sure. And one of my drunken friends kept nudging him, what's the leopard doing up in Kilimanjaro? And then he saw my bota, and he said, this is what the peasants drink? And I said, yes, sir. And do you know how to drink? And he took the bota from me, and he arched it, and he drank the wine perfectly as it touched his lips. And then he said, are you running with the Bulls tomorrow? I said, yes. He said, don't. It's bad luck on the first day. So we ran anyway. And I forgot my belt, and I ran in the streets with my pants falling down, and people were making fun of me. I'll never forget that. But Hemingway, what a consummation devoutly to be wished. To meet him as the mayor of Pamplona, it blew me away. And my friends, first they were annoyed with me for yelling to this mythic figure. And then when he sat down with us, I became the king of this little quintet. And I'll never forget. And then 2 years later, I was in Europe again, and I read the terrible news that Hemingway put a rifle through his mouth and killed himself in despair. One of the great, the giants of American literature. And
that is very sad that he was led to that, and that nobody intervened and saw his pain. And what a waste. That's horrible.
But in his last great book about the old man and the sea, he talked about Joe DiMaggio, whose father was a fisherman, and it was a great player. And so here you have the intersection of literature and baseball that is timeless.
Beautiful. We couldn't have done it better, and if you will agree to come back, I would love to talk to you about Paul Robeson. We don't have time, but if you enjoyed yourself enough to come back, I am totally honored with that.
I am, and I want to pick up on something you said. You know, Sharon Robinson lives in Boca Raton. People have seen her there. She would be a great interview if you can get in touch with Jackie's daughter.
I would love to. And if you would go to my site on YouTube and punch in Comfortably Zoned and Peter Golenbach. Peter and I did a weekly show podcast together for years, and you can enjoy some of or all of them are archived. You can pick them out and listen to Peter Golenbach, your good friend, and right. We share the love for that man, you and I. He really legitimized my podcasting network right from the start, and so there you go. Thank you for being here, sir.
Thanks for having me, and keep up the great work.
And you too, keep up the great work. 86 is a young man by today's standards. I could tell you that you don't sound or think like an 86-year-old man, and you're an inspiration to me.
Yeah, and I'm going to the gym right after this podcast to keep in shape. Take care, my friend.
You too. Thank you for listening, everybody. This was a great one for me. Joseph Dorinson was the guest. I'm Ralph Tyko, the weak link of it all. And all I want to say is adios and happy trails. Thank you, Joseph.
My pleasure. Bye.
Bye.
The proceeding has been a Comfortably Zoned network production. You are advised to keep your dreams wet, your humor dry, your children and grandchildren out of military recruiting offices and off the laps of clerics who wear dresses. Thank you for listening, everyone. Happy trails.